What happens when two gardeners start looking at botany books online? Listen to this week's episode to find out.
Welcome to the Garden Angelist, where we talk about flowers, veggies, and all the best dirt. I'm Carol Michael from Indianapolis, Indiana, where I have a suburban garden measured in square feet.
And I'm Dee Nash from Guthrie, Oklahoma, where I garden on several acres out in the country. Too many.
We call ourselves Garden Angelists because we are evangelists for gardening. We love gardening and we want others to love it too.
Yes, we do. And we aren't afraid to spill the beans and tell all of our gardening secrets, the good, the bad, and even the ugly. But that's enough of who, what, when, where, why. Let's move on to this week's episode. Hello, Carol. How does your garden grow?
Hello, Dee. I've got the good, the bad, and the ugly again. Ready for the good?
Mm-hmm.
So my tomatoes plants, pepper plants, corn are finally growing because, they were tiny when I put them out there. Hasn't been too hot, except today's kind of hot. And I haven't seen any Japanese beetles yet.
Well, that's good.
So the bad is I got me some weeds. I do a little weeding every day because I got to get it under control. And the ugly is the weeds.
So why are the weeds both the bad and the ugly?
Because they make the garden look ugly.
Oh, I got it. Yeah, they do.
So you still have Japanese beetles?
I do. And I caught several last week in my sudsy water trap and I disposed of them. And in the meantime, I also cut off all of my rose blooms to dissuade them from being there. And then I harvested some of my fingerling potatoes, my green beans, some peppers, and my first 2 tomatoes. And they were not cherry tomatoes. They were big slicers, and we ate them last night.
Yum. I have had several cherry tomatoes off that Kitchen Mini. They sent me that sample tomato plant it's only like 6 inches tall of that. But I've gotten 3 or 4 off of that. But they're minis.
Well, that works. I mean, so they mature fast, I'm sure.
They do.
I'm also weeding between thunderstorms. And as we're talking, there's a thunderstorm bearing down on my son's house, which is a few miles from my house. And that's because my internet's down. But that's about another thing that we can talk about later. So do you have a quote for us?
I do. I wonder what it would be like to live in a world where it was always June. L.M. Montgomery.
Well, we would probably take it for granted, knowing how people are.
Yeah. It's like I've heard that people like San Diego is like always sunshine and 70s. And people after a while, they want change. Right?
Yeah. I mean, I hear that. I've been to San Diego and I was there in January and it was 70 degrees and I loved every bit of it. So what are we talking about in our flower? We're doing our new series on flower shapes.
And this week, we're going to talk about racemes.
Yes, racemes. And racemes are defined as a flower cluster with separate flowers attached by short, equal stalks at equal distances along a central stem. Flowers at the base develop first, and then it blooms up toward the top. Racemes can be simple or they can be compound. And so we got this from a website about different flower types, and we will link to that. It's the seed collection because we actually used their quote and definition. But that includes a bunch of different types of plants.
Tons of them.
Tons.
Including Baptisia, which last week we talked about. What did Carol plant in place of camellias? And I planted a bunch of Baptisia in that spot.
I bet those Baptisia do a lot better than those camellias did.
Yes,
Indiana.
they do. Yes, they do. Some other racemes are Phlox paniculata, which is actually a compound raceme, but we're not going to get all complicated. And of course, lily of the valley.
Yep, it'd be a raceme too. So we're going to talk today about one type, just like we did last week. We talked about umbels, and this week we're talking about racemes. And so last week was it about Angelicas? I think it was.
Yes,
and
it
so
was.
This week, I'm doing good today. And so this week's about Baptisia because we both grow Baptisias.
Yes.
And my Baptisia was the star of the garden tour a week ago. One of mine.
Why was it still blooming?
No, it was not still blooming, but it's huge and it has giant seed pods on it. I'm stretching out my arms, and I know you don't believe me that it's this huge, but it is. And people were like, "What is that plant?" And I said, "That plant's trying to eat all the other plants in that bed, so I'm going to have to cut it back." I think it's because of the rain we've had. So
Oh,
tell
yeah.
about Baptisias from the Missouri Botanical Garden.
Yeah, I looked it up on the Missouri Botanical Garden because you had listed some Baptisias of a species that I was not aware of. And so I had to look up some stuff because I had to get it straight in my mind. But Baptisia, there's about 20 different species. Most of them are native to the United States, eastern, southern US. You find them in dry, gravelly soil, which kind of tells you where to put them. They're good for drought. They're good for erosion control. They have huge seed pods, as you know.
Yes, they do.
And the pea-like flowers are very attractive to butterflies and insect pollinators. And I'll tell you, I've got one that's really big and it's flopped over. So it's kind of a lesson
Sometimes
for next year. I may need to put support up so it can kind of grow up into the support, which is much easier to support something when it's little and grows into its support than to try to find support once it's a huge, big monster.
Yeah, because then it's too late. And I remember that from a book we read a long time ago about we made a garden, and the husband in that was always like big on supports. And I didn't get it until recently, and now I mean until 10 years ago. I really think it's important. Like with peonies, if you're going to use a peony support, you want to put it on there early so that it can grow up through it. Same thing with Baptisias, echinaceas. Right now, my hollyhocks are flopped over because of the rain. We got 4 inches this week.
I told you in an earlier podcast that hollyhocks attract big storms. As soon as they're like up and pretty and like glorious and ready to take a picture,
Yeah.
you say, well, I'll just wait till after this thunderstorm, and then they'll be all flat on the ground and there will be no picture.
Well, I'm actually going to prop mine up. After I get done here, I'm going to go back home, stick some bamboo stakes in there and tie them to them, and they'll be okay. But these are not very tall hollyhocks, so that's a good news. So the genus name Baptisia comes from the Greek word bapto, meaning to dye, because I think, isn't it the pods?
Well,
the dye.
I don't know if it's the pods. I think it was the flowers, but they used to, or the common name is false indigo, because they would use the flowers, I think, as a substitute for indigo.
Which is really hard to grow.
Indigo will give you a much, much better blue than Baptisia, but it's if you're a hobbyist or whatever, I suppose you could give it a whirl. Are you going to dye anything with your flowers, Dee?
Well, it's funny you should ask me that, because my friend Karen Collier, and she and her husband John came over last night, and she actually does do some dyeing with natural flowers and natural seed pods. And she goes, "Would you like to do some dyeing this summer?" And I thought, I don't know if I would or not, but yeah, if it's your house, sure, I'll come over and dye. So she's collecting calendula and a bunch of other things that you use to dye. And also, we should mention that Baptisias, although they use them for false indigo dyes, they're not all blue. Baptisias come in a multitude of colors. And if you want to see a good representation of those colors, if you go over to Nan Andra's blog for this month, Hayfield, she talks about all the Baptisias that she let go to seed, and then she cross-pollinated. And she's got a whole Hayfield line of Baptisias. And I thought that was really interesting.
I will put a link to that,
because I bought some seeds from her the other day. So, but I thought her Baptisias, and I have some of these ones. So which Baptisia is best in your mind?
I don't know. I've got like 6 or 7, but I don't really know other than which one is purple smoke. The others, they were in flower and they were pretty, and I got them to plant in place of the camellias. So I have like 6 over there. And so there are tags somewhere, and I could marry up the tags to the things to tell you what I have, but that's a lot of work. I'm not doing that.
I know that I have some of these. I have Screaming Yellow. Well, we should say that Mount Cuba Center, it's a nonprofit botanical garden that's located in Hocassin, I'm probably butchering that, guys, Delaware, near Wilmington, Delaware. They did a 3-year study of Baptisias in the landscape, and these were their top performers. And I have several of these. So I have Screaming Yellow, and I had Purple Smoke, but eventually it died. I have Cherry's Jubilee, which is up by the purpley blue one that's trying to eat the entire front bed. I bought Blueberry Sunday this year, but I couldn't find a place to put it. So I actually gave it to a friend. I gave it to my friend Casey. So there are a lot of these that are out that are really good. Purple Smoke does not produce seed pods. I do remember that about it. Screaming Yellow is a very bright yellow. I also have Carolina Moonlight. Did you ever grow that one?
I do not have Carolina Moonlight. No, I do have Carolina Moonlight.
It's kind of a pale yellow.
Carolina Moonlight. I can't find it. So I don't know if it died out, but I wanted to go back to Purple Smoke.
Yeah,
so
mine never
Purple
produced
Smoke
seeds.
Is a hybrid. So it will produce seed, but the seed won't be anything. It won't be Purple Smoke at all. So don't mess.
So mine never would produce seed pods.
Really?
Ever.
I'm sure mine's got seed pods out there because I cut them off after a while. I don't want these to go to seed because, again, huge plants, deep roots, really hard to get rid of if you don't want it. If you want it, it's going to die on you. That's plants.
Right. I mean, that's just plants in general, isn't it? I mean, if you own a $200 daylily, and yes, there is such a thing, that's the one that's going to die in your garden. My $10 one that's red has been there. It's called Red Volunteer. I think it's a $5 one at this point. That thing, you couldn't stop it if you tried. And it's the same thing with certain Baptisias. So I lost Purple Smoke. Eventually it died out, and that's okay because I didn't need it. Cherry's Jubilee has always stayed very small. And I have one of the chocolate ones, although I don't have Dutch chocolate. Anyway, there are lots and lots of different ones out there on the market, from the species, where they're the straight species, all the way. And they run from yellows to kind of a chocolatey color to almost a red, but not really. And then I've seen them in purple and blue and white. I had a white one at one time.
Right.
I actually have a pink one called Pink Truffles, which is very unusual. And I bought it from a guy locally.
Yeah. And because there's several different species, I think a lot of the Baptisias on the market, like Purple Smoke, are actually hybrids of where they've done a lot of crossbreeding. So it's a great big plant. I'll say big, 3 to 4 feet on a good year. So don't put it on the front of the border, mid to back, depending on how tall your border is, mid to back. And then, like I said, I sometimes will cut off the seed pods just so I don't have anything go to seed. And also, I don't know, because I'm insane. I don't know. I just do it.
I don't cut the seed pods off, and I've never had any of them come up from seed, but that's just my house and my conditions, and who knows why. I had another thought about them. Oh, in Oklahoma, if we have a really dry year, they die back to the ground after they bloom.
Really?
And then they hide. Yes. And then they hide, and you think they're dead, and then they come back up next spring. But on a year like this year, they try to eat your bed. So you just never know what you're going to do. Also, they have a tap root. You mentioned they have deep roots. They have a great big tap root, which I think makes them hard to transplant. Don't go dig them in the wild. Just buy one. I mean, a lot of native plant supply places sell them. They are not hard to get. I do love them. They're one of the first things to bloom. Queen carpenter bees love them. Bumblebees love them. And it's just a joy to give them something. How's that?
Exactly. That's good. And I think they're very lovely. And even in my smaller garden, I have found room for Baptisias because they are pretty.
They are pretty. So you ready for the next quote?
Go for it.
Spring being a tough act to follow, God created June. Al Bernstein. Okay, that is just a sweet quote.
It is.
I like it.
You see the
That's
theme
like one I would frame.
You see the theme.
Yes, it's about June. I got it.
Yeah.
Good job. So the next thing we're going to talk about, not next time, the next thing is our veggie. And believe it or not, cole crops have raceme flowers.
Exactly. If you let them go to flower. And so that brings us to the vegetable we're actually going to talk about is collard greens.
Collards. Yeah.
And there is a national seed saving project, which is trying to keep the species genetic diversity and showcasing its historical importance. And this goes back to the Seed Savers Exchange, which is
has to be Southern Southern Exposure, or is it Seed Savers? Which one?
It's Seed Savers. And so, yeah, well, Ira Wallace, who we both know from the Southern Exposure Seed Exchange, she worked with the Seed Savers Exchange in Decorah, Iowa, to collect and grow all these different collards, and they call it the Heirloom Collard Project. And we'll link to some information about it.
Why are you calling it Collard?
I don't know, because I'm from
Indiana.
Collard.
It's collard.
I don't know.
Have you eaten a lot of collard greens in your life?
No, I don't really like cooked greens.
Have you ever grown collards?
No, I don't.
I have.
Collards.
Okay.
I'm not helping with the genetic diversity of it because I don't grow any of it. So,
they're easy to grow. They're very easy to grow. They don't like super hot summers, but people in the South love to eat them. So they will tolerate more heat than, say, Chinese mustard or some of the chards, like vivid chard. So if you let them go to seed, then you're going to end up with some that have raceme flowers.
That's right. And I was looking at some of the variety names, and they have names like Old Timey Blue, which obviously has a bluish tint to the leaf, North Carolina Yellow, Miss Annie Pearl Councilman, and Green.
I like that
Glaze.
one. Huh? I like that, Miss Annie Pearl Councilman.
And Green Glaze.
Those are some good names. Yeah. So now they have. I think it's important that we preserve collards. I think collard greens are delicious, especially cooked with a little bit of fat back. But that's just going back to my childhood and stuff.
Yeah, they did a whole thing with trying to gather all these. And there's a really nice picture that shows the diversity. You wouldn't think that they would all look that different, but there's quite a bit of difference. And one of the things they found out,
they are.
And this is true of a lot of these old varieties that people just save seed every year. And so obviously they're having to let them go to flower. Mm-hmm. The people that were saving these seeds, I hate to say this, but they're dying out and they don't really have anybody, waiting in the wings to take over the collection or the keeping of the variety. So it's good that organizations like Seed Savers Exchange and Southern
Exposure Seed Exchange.
Yeah. That they're stepping in to to save these varieties, because that's important.
It is important. And Ira Wallace is a great historian, and she wrote that book about the Southeast, and she knows so much about gardening in the Southeast and also just about history and culture and such. So pretty cool.
Yeah, it's fun to highlight her work, and we'll leave a link and people can go read all about this project. And I'm not going to try to say Collards again.
You'll just don't put an I in it. It's just Collards.
I don't know why I want to put an I in there, because I'm from Indiana.
So you going to do our next quote?
I am. One benefit of summer was that each day we had more light to read by. Jeanette Walls.
And that's the best part of summer, isn't it? I mean, ultimately, is that you can read books, and at nighttime, the light is much, much later. I've been watching the fireflies in my garden. And so every night after, when it starts to get dark, we go sit on my deck and watch the fireflies. That's just cool. Summer to me. So on the bookshelf is us, because we're hilarious, is Plant Families, a guide for gardeners and botanists by Ross Baton and Simon. I'm just going to pronounce it as Maun or Mon. I don't know how you pronounce it.
I think that's usually
okay. Well, we're going to say Mon. And so these are British books. This is a British book.
Well, yeah, there was one. So we were trying to figure out the book, and I ran and got this book off my shelf. And it is really nice. It's nicely illustrated. Anybody that's into gardening, you could go through and just peruse the different families and find out something. So we looked this up online, and that's when we got the big surprise that there are 3 books in this series. And I had one, and you had none.
I had 0.
And now you have the other 2. You have all 3 books. And 2 books are coming my way.
So you still haven't gotten them yet?
No.
So this is what happens, people. We need to be on Patreon just so that we can recoup our costs because we spend so much money on this silly, silly podcast of ours. So we ended up with Plant Families, a
Yep.
guide for
Which
gardeners
already
and
had.
botanists. I did not, but I had to buy it, of course. And then we ended up with Latin for Gardeners, over 3,000 plant names explained and explored by Lorraine Harrison. And then, not to be outdone, Practical Botany for Gardeners by George Hodge. So now both of us own all three of these. And these are not simple books. I read the botany one and I realized how much botany I have forgotten.
Well, yeah. So that's what the fun of it is you pick, you remember what you forgot. And I can just pick up when I have a college textbook. This is going to sound really geeky on plant physiology. And I open that book and think, did I used to know this stuff? And I have little notes on the margin and I'm like, I used to know this stuff. Who was that person?
So, dear listeners, by us talking about racemes and umbels and whatever it is we're going to talk about next week, we are talking about botany. And we also talk about plant families almost every single time. And we always use Latin names off and on. And so we need these books.
Yes. And so I will call attention to the blog post and video that I put out about the new plant family that I've discovered called Legolaceae, which is my Lego.
That one made
flowers,
me laugh.
which is my Lego flowers. So I'm gonna leave a link to that so people can see that. Surprisingly, Dee, or not surprisingly, Legolaceae is not in the plant families book.
Oh, you don't think so? I'm just really surprised by that.
No, I've looked it up and I'm thinking, oh, well, it's not in here. And that's not a surprise because when I came up with that plant family name, I did Google it and nobody else had come up with it either. So I'll just put a little note in the index and say, if you're looking for Legolaceae, it's not here.
But it is on a video and a blog post.
That's right.
So there you go. And no, I still don't have my post finished that I was going to do last week because, well, my internet went down several days ago and it's still not fixed because I live in the country. My son lives 3 miles away and I'm at his house and he has Cox cable. I think that's unfair, but that's okay. I'm glad he lives close by. So can I do the next quote?
Absolutely.
Because it's my quote, my thing. I've grown a thing, Jeremy Clarkson. So our dirt this week is Jeremy Clarkson's farm. And I'm telling you, it is the funniest thing I've watched in a long time. And it's on, is it on Prime Video? I think
it's on Amazon Prime Video.
Prime Video. Yeah.
I was reading today and I've watched it all too. And then there's tons of clips on YouTube. But I was reading today that it is Amazon's top rated show of all time.
Are you kidding?
No. And in this,
that's funny.
Some IMDb that rating, for shows.
Yeah, the rating
stuff, is a 9.3 out of 10, which they said is unheard of. I mean, this is a hit.
And you loved it too, right?
I loved it. It's hilarious.
It's hilarious and it's also serious.
It is hilarious. Yes, the serious message about how difficult farming is. And this is obviously taking place in the UK. Jeremy Clarkson is known for being the former host of Top Gear, which is a show I've never watched.
Very famous car show.
Very famous car show, as I understand it. But the premise is he bought a farm in the Cotswolds in 2008, I think.
Yeah, I think it was 2008.
In 2019 or 2020.
It was 2019 at first, but then yes, this series runs through 2020. Well, so you get COVID in there.
There's a guy that was farming. This is a 1,000-acre farm. So the guy that was farming says, I'm going to retire. And so Jeremy Clarkson's like, how hard could this be? So,
he thought, because he's a smart guy. I mean, and I'll be honest with you, I didn't like him on Top Gear. It was his job to be the agitator on Top Gear. That was his role of the three of them. And I didn't like him on that. But by the end of Clarkson's farm, I loved him because he loves that farm.
He loves that.
And he loves the people who work for him and the stupid sheep, which are really one of the funniest part of the whole thing.
Oh my gosh.
I know. And his girlfriend is very sweet. I'm telling you guys, if you need an uplifting thing to watch, this is a good one.
And here's the big news. I found out today there will be a season 2.
Yay!
They're
I can't tell you how
now.
happy that makes me.
They're filming now. So anyway, yeah, he's done a thing, as he would say.
Yes, he's done a thing. And then what was cute is he said, I grew a thing. I've grown a thing. Because, he always used to say, I've done a thing when he was on the other show. But you could see that he was really pleased with himself when he learned how to grow things.
Yeah, he grew potatoes. And then they have a farm shop he calls it Diddley Squat Farms. And so, I mean, it is funny, but there's some serious messages in it. But
yeah.
About
large scale farming.
Yeah. It's not easy.
No, it's not easy. And I admire all the farmers out there because I don't think I could do it.
I don't.
So what are you going to do in your garden this week?
Well, I'm going to finish up all my shrub and tree trimming. I have an arborist crew that's coming on Friday to do some trimming in my honey locust because it's way up there and they're going to have to climb up there. They're also going to take out some overgrown junipers and grind out the stumps. And they said if I had done any other branches I had, they would take. So there will be a huge pile in my driveway when they get here. But the funny thing, I'm minding my beeswax. And somebody's marked the utilities by the water meter by the street. And I'm like, what's that all about? So I called the water company and they connected me with the 811 digging people. And he said, oh, yeah, your arborist requested that because they're going to grind out stumps. But the stumps are up by the house. And so, he says all the utility people have to come and mark their utilities by the end of the day. Today, Monday. I'm like, this now makes sense why suddenly utilities are being marked. So it's a good crew that they're doing that. You don't want to be digging, grinding out stumps or doing anything like that until you have your utilities marked.
That's for sure.
That's my tip for the day. What are you doing in your garden?
I'll be weeding and I've got to check my bees between thunderstorms. Like tomorrow I'm going to the greenhouse, but Wednesday, I got to check my bees because it's a little past time and I've got to feed some and do some of that, but also, weeding. I got to weed and cut things back, like all the scapes and stuff. Spent scapes on daylilies. Yeah, because all this rain, the crabgrass is crazy. It's completely crazy. And the Johnson grass, it came out of nowhere too. So I'm going to be busy. Yes, I am.
You are going to be busy. So anyway, we want to thank everyone for listening to the Garden Angelus. If you like our podcast, please tell your friends about us. Also hit that subscribe button so you don't miss anything.
And if you listen to Apple Podcasts, we'd love a 5-star review. That helps us get noticed by others. Could you also share our podcast with your gardening friends? Word of mouth is still the best way to get the word out there.
Yes, and be sure and check out our show notes for links for more information about today's topics, plus links to our own websites. And if you use those affiliate links, especially to buy books, it
helps us.
Yeah, it helps us. We earn a small commission and it costs you nothing.
It was lovely to chat with all of you over the garden gate today. Bye until next week.
Bye, everybody.